Okay, it's exactly 2 p.m. in Turkey, 1 a.m. in Central Europe. So 7 a.m. in the morning for Teddy, and I guess it is midday for Irene, right? Okay, then I'd like to welcome you all here to this session. Today in this session, we will have Irene Glendening from United Kingdom, Teddy Fishman from United States, and Emilia Sharjan from Romania. I'm sure you are already familiar with these important figures, and they will be having a session on breaches of academic integrity related to this. They will also talk about fraud and corruption. Inga, would you like to welcome our participants as well?
Yeah, welcome. It's nice to see everyone joining one. I hope that you all had a very good session in the morning and you will have as good in the afternoon. And I just remind you that we are monitoring your activity. So please don't hesitate, raise your questions, get involved in the discussions, and of course be attentive because we'll have quiz on Friday. And we really have a nice gift for you. So session, and also for our speakers today.
Good morning.
Okay, so the stage is yours. Enjoy your
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope everyone who's with us this morning has been enjoying the session so far. I wasn't in the morning one yesterday, but I was in the afternoon one, and the participation was great. The questions that were raised were excellent. And honestly, I was very surprised because we ran out of time. And usually in a 3-hour session, by the end of it, everyone's ready to go. But instead, we actually had to cut ourselves a little bit short. I'm presenting with Emilia and Irene this morning, and having presented with Irene before, I already knew as soon as I saw the assignments that Irene was going to have more good stuff for us than we can possibly fit, because that's just always what happens. Irene is a treasure trove of information, and then Emilia has some perspectives related specifically to fraud. And our presentation is somewhat focused on the way that these things transfer across, that it is sometimes for students, they question why we have to pay so much attention to academic integrity, because they're only going to occupy that space for maybe 4 years, or at the most they're going to be there with us for 6 or 8 years. But part of the whole point is that what we're doing with the European Network for Academic Integrity isn't just about what happens in schools. It is setting the stage for things that are going to be issues for the entire professional life of all of us. We are going to start out by talking about the definition of academic integrity, and I was hoping that we could start our participatory session with that question, that I'd like to have everyone's idea of what they think of when they think of academic integrity. And it doesn't have to be a dictionary definition, but instead could even be a conglomeration of the things that you think are encompassed with the when you hear the phrase academic integrity. The hardest part for me when I ask a question is being quiet while everybody answers. And I hope that you guys will take some time right now just to write just a quick response to the question, what you think of when you hear academic integrity. If you can post it in the chat, that would be best. Don't be shy. There we go. Thank you. So yes, so far we're focusing on honesty and transparency, and those are two very important things. We just added fairness, responsibility, and accountability. Being human, I love that. Strict commitment to fundamental values, empowering academic society, I'm just hitting some of the highlights. Authorship and identity, very good. I love what Faisa, and please forgive me if I get the pronunciations wrong, please pop on and just tell me how to actually pronounce the names. But Faisa says the person is knowledgeable in the work that they have done. And I actually think that I'm going to start with that. We have originality and courage, but I think I'm going to start with that definition because that is at the heart of why these things matter as well, right? We are ultimately trying to make sure that when people graduate from college, they know the things that their diploma says that they know, right? And that's only possible if we have a high degree of integrity in academia, because if, for instance, we reach a point where cheating has become so routine and so accepted, then at that point, the diplomas will become worthless. And I found of all the things that I talk about when I talk with students, that's the thing that seems to resonate the most, is that if we don't maintain some degree of academic integrity, then the diplomas that they are working so hard to earn, when they leave our setting, those diplomas will be worthless, because potential employers or anybody else who might be interested in those candidates, if we know that cheating happens so often as to make our accreditation processes, and then I'm thinking about like the credentialing of students, not the credentialing of universities. Although, since we're talking about fraud and corruption, we should mention that it's true on that level as well, right? That if a university, if it becomes known either through a cheating scandal or just because it's become common knowledge that a university isn't paying attention to maintaining the integrity of their assessments, then their credentialing is also, it also becomes meaningless. All right. Oh, thank you so much for telling me that that's the correct pronunciation. I appreciate it. Someone put in collaboration. And I think that that is an often overlooked aspect of defining academic integrity, that it isn't that we preclude or we prohibit collaboration. It's more that we define what the nature of the collaboration is. It's also important, it's important that students don't collaborate when they're not supposed to, but it's also important that when we specify that we have a group project, everybody on the team has actually contributed to that project, right? So the collaboration issue goes both ways. Originality, yes. We'll come back to originality in just a couple of minutes, because that is a really tricky one. One of the things that first stuck out to me when I was starting to think about academic integrity stuff, I was working at the writing lab at Purdue University and negotiating my role as a tutor. And we can talk about that in a little bit too, if you'd like to. And one of the things that students were confounded by was our requirement in our assignments that we require them to be original. And if you think about yourself as an undergraduate, this might be true for you. It was certainly true for me. If somebody told me that I had to come up with an idea in an economics class, for instance, that was original, I don't have any original thoughts about economics. Like, really, the very best that I can do is look at the sources that I can consult as experts, and then maybe put some of the things that they have said together in a new way, or perhaps apply it to a new field, but I don't, or a new subject, but I don't have original thoughts in economics. I don't have original thoughts in mathematics. You know what I mean? So when we ask students to be original, sometimes I think we need to be a little bit more specific, that we are asking them to write a paper in which the combinations of things or the reflection on things is their original work. But the idea of like asking them, setting them up where they think that we're actually asking them for a new thought that hasn't been thought before, that's a lot. And I think that part of their fear sometimes, that they don't have the necessary skills to complete the work by themselves. I think that comes from a misunderstanding of what we're asking for when we ask for original work. The aspect of feeling safe in our study and work environment, there are so many different levels of safety in academia, some of which have to do with the safety to express your ideas, a lot of which, in my opinion, at the undergrad level, have to do with letting the students know that it's okay to have to write a paper in which you explore some ideas, and the conclusion is that those ideas don't work. or in the lab, that you're going to do an experiment, and the outcome of the experiment might be that the thing that you'd hope to have happen isn't possible and isn't going to happen. And that is some real good work and a good discovery to have found paths that can now be closed off because we know that they don't work. So that freedom to fail, that freedom to explore and not have things work out the way you had hoped, that is at the heart of authentic academic work, right? That's the heart of the academy, is that we have to be able to explore some ideas, whether or not it turns out that they turn out the way that we think they would. All right, putting forth your best effort, respect and honesty to everyone who's part of the academic environments. And that's another thing about the session today, is yesterday's session, as so many discussions, at least the one I was in, yesterday's session focused on what students do, the choices that students make, and whether or not they're doing their work with integrity. And today we're going to talk about not only students, but also the things that happen in academia at large, and then on out into society. So I think that there's a great deal of consensus in the responses that you guys have put down, that we're looking for not just fair practices. That's like a minimum, and it's very important to establish that fairness is absolutely minimum. But also, I really like the responses that focused on things like being human, things like being kind, things like being safe, to make our academic communities places that we can see what's going on because of the transparency. And we're all committed, and that word commitment came up in a couple of your responses. We're all committed to making sure that that the relationship between academics and their students, the relationship between academics and scholarship, the relationship between students and scholarship, the institution and scholarship, all of those relationships are transparent, they're fair, they're honest, and that we are operating with enough transparency and honesty that people can feel safe and secure about the things that we are doing in academia. All right, that was lovely. All right, I'm going to ask one more question in the chat box, and this one is going to be, I'm going to be taking notes from this and applying it to what our speakers say, so that we can address your concerns at the end. And I'd like to encourage everyone, I hope that we can use this chat space as a parallel to discussion, so that we're not having any we're not going off topic. But if you have a thought, or if you have a question, or if you have a concern that arises from Amelia and Irene's presentation, you'll put it over in the chat. I will make a note of it, and we will we'll incorporate that into the discussion at the end. All right, so here's my question to you, is what have been the things that you've encountered so far in your academic career that you found most challenging? And what have you had questions about that have yet been unanswered regarding academic integrity and fraud and corruption? So the things that you've already encountered that you have found most challenging, and the things that you have questions about that you haven't had answers yet. And I know this is only the beginning, or no, this is the second session of day 2. It can have to do with the class, or it can have to do with the things that you have observed. And if you'll just pop those over in the chat now, and then remember to use that chat, if you can, as a place to ask questions or raise concerns about things that are going on, so that we can circle back around to them. And then with that, I think I will turn it over to to Irene to give us some, what I know are going to be amazing examples of fraud and corruption that we can use for discussion fodder. Irene?
Okay, I'm going to just start by just showing you the third slide on here, because I think it's important that we focus on what it is we're trying to get out of every one of these sessions. So in this particular workshop, and it is a workshop, which means it's not just us talking to you, it's very participative, but I understand that you've been very actively participating in the earlier ones, so just continue to do that. And also just use the chat for any ideas that you come up with, any thoughts you've got, not just questions, but any observations as well. So intended learning outcomes. What we'd like you to do by the end of this workshop, we'd like you to have awareness of different types of malpractice and corruption in higher education and in research, to capture any potential concerns or risks that you are facing or you suspect. So use the chat to tell us about any of those that actually that come into your mind as we're going through, or that may already perhaps be in your focus. And we are providing guidance about how to respond to corruption, ethical conduct, so that you will have guidance and you'll be able to act on that guidance that we provided you at the end. And we'll perhaps generate some new ideas, hopefully, from you as well. Understanding different perspectives in different parts of the world is really quite important. And obviously, all of these sessions are about appreciating the need for research integrity and ethical values. So I'm going to, and I can see that I'm not looking at the chat, so if there's anything comes up in the chat, Amelia or Teddy, please interrupt me. I'm going to stop sharing this one for now, and I'm going to share a new presentation with you. Let's see if I can find the one. That's the one there. Okay. So just bear with me while I get that working. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you. It's quite a long presentation, and I've tried to make it interactive in places, and I'm going to move through bits of it fairly fast. So if you have any really burning questions you want to ask me about anything that I'm showing you, then please feel free to just interrupt if you want to, or one of my colleagues will interrupt me and we'll come back with some questions. I'm going to talk mainly about a study that I led with two of my colleagues from Coventry University a few years back. But the focus was on the funder of this research was the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, which is based in Washington, DC, United States. And they have a branch called the International Quality Groups, TIQG, who funded this research, together with, and also the UNESCO IIEP were involved in it as well in the early stages. So my own university is Coventry University there, so hopefully we'll move on. So I'm going to start just to give you a brief description of my own research. And the point of doing that is not just to brag about the research I've done, but to tell you about how you can get involved in research so that you've got some kind of understanding of how research is initiated and how you can get involved in research yourself. Because actually that's quite important to you as young researchers. And then I'm going to mainly focus in on examples of fraud and corruption that came up either through the literature review that we did or through the actual research that we conducted. And then we'll look at the end at implications for higher education and research and your role in fighting corruption and fraud and bringing about integrity. So I've been very lucky in my research. And when I started my research, I didn't have a doctorate, but I got a lot of experience in higher education. And the first project that I was involved in concerning academic integrity, I had done research before in other fields, mainly to do with student-focused work, like looking at disabled students and looking at teaching and learning. And I was interested in doing a project about quality assurance. And the project that came up was one that and it was about plagiarism. So we ran that project with European funding between 2010 and 2013. And that was with 5 partners. It wasn't a very happy project. But the great thing about that project is it put me in touch with Thomas Foltinek, and that really gave rise to the European network, because the network came out of that project and other work that we did. But the Council of Europe loved what we did on that project, because what we did in that project is we surveyed 27 countries. Didn't get a lot of data in some countries, but it was a very ambitious project to do in 3 years, and we got a lot of information from that. Some of the data we're still using now. And the Council of Europe liked what we'd done, so they asked us to extend it, which led to 2 more projects. We didn't need to bid for those projects. The Council of Europe asked us to do them. So that was really quite good. And again, someone else picked up on the research that we'd done, and that was Chia CIQG on this global site. And I was asked to do that project, and I brought 2 colleagues in to help me with that project. So, I mean, the point about this slide is you don't always have to bid for research funding. I've been very lucky with mine, with most of the research I've done, although we have put in quite long, complicated bids for some funding. Some funding, if you do a really good project, other funding leads from those projects. And, you know, and lots of other things like the ENAI network has stemmed out of that initial project that we did. So I think it was quite important to set that scene. And the project I'm going to talk about was a global project. I called it PAQAB, and I did this with two of my colleagues, Stella Marie Orim and Andrew King. And I've got their details on the very last slide, so if you have to check who they are. And so it was just three of us that did the research. And we were asked to capture evidence of how accreditation and quality assurance bodies, and those are the things I want to refer to throughout the talk. When I talk about AQABs, I'm talking about quality assurance and accreditation agencies. And these are the kind of bodies that go into universities. They provide the legitimacy for the universities to offer degrees, and they check on the quality. And they will do various, they have different remits, the different kind of agencies. But generally these bodies is what it's about. So these bodies have a really interesting role because they are auditing institutions or checking institutions, and checking their legitimacy, checking whether they're actually fit and appropriate organizations, institutions to offer degrees. So that tells you straight away that these organizations should have a view on academic integrity. And if they don't have a view on academic integrity, if they don't have a view on corruption and fraud and all the negative things about integrity, then there is something wrong with the way that the system works. So what we were trying to do is to do a global survey of high quality assurance bodies that are part of this cheer network, and to find out what their views were and to see what they're doing about corruption across the world. So we were building on an existing report, and the reference to that is in the back. And we started off by doing a literature review, which is quite an interesting thing to do because I learned about lots of different kinds of fraud and corruption that I wasn't aware of in different parts of the world. I have to tell you, it's very, very common across the world. There isn't a country that we found that doesn't have any corruption or fraud. I don't think it just applies to certain countries. That's not true. But we also did a survey of these quality assurance bodies. I'm not going to tell you too much about the results of that survey, although I do have some graphs on there in the slides because people love graphs. So we did an online questionnaire and we ran quite a lot of interviews. I think we did 22 semi-structured interviews. And then the report was published in 2019, and they also published a follow-up report with some general guidance to the sector, particularly to quality assurance agency on building on what we said in the report. So what I mean by corruption and in higher education, so what we looked at in particularly, we looked at regulation of higher education. We looked at whether there was any corruption in any of these fields. So in regulation, teaching, anything to do with teaching, anything to do with student admission and recruitment of students. Student assessment was the big one, and that's the one we normally focus on, which is why it's important to look at the other ones as well. And then we looked at credentials and qualifications, and Teddy's already mentioned some of those. And then finally, we looked at research and academic publishing. So first of all, we needed to think about what we meant by corruption. So in this particular study, what we meant by corruption was we were looking at intentional acts of individuals or groups to do something fraudulent, rather than misconduct through accident, incompetence or ignorance. So if you kind of face it, bear that in mind when we're talking. Some of the examples I'm going to show you are not corruption. Some of the examples are generally are misconduct or breaches of integrity that are accidental. But most of what I'm going to talk about falls into that category of deliberate fraud. And why it's important to quality assurance agencies and everyone, in fact, is because if you have corruption of any kind, then your quality standards is undermined. So I'm going to pause for a minute here because one of the things that came up in one of the interviews we did, and this was from a quality assurance body in Europe, is the interviewee said to me, but we don't know what, there is no universal definition of quality and standards. You know, we all mean the same thing by quality and standards. So I'm going to ask you to think for a minute or two, and there is no easy answer to this. I don't have an answer to it. What do you understand by quality in education? So how does it manifest itself? And how does quality relate to standards in education and research, and why is that important? So fire away in the chat and get some things written in there, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes and we'll have a look at that. And perhaps my fellow presenters might think about those things as well. It's not easy.
Irene, could you phrase that just one more time? Exactly what you're looking for in the chat?
I'm looking for you to, it's actually on the slide. What do you understand by quality in education and research is the first question. And how,
so you want all the answers to all three of those in the slide or in the chat, sorry.
And how does quality relate to standards in education and research?
Okay.
Two kind of questions there.
It just seems so big on the slide. That's why I asked for the qualification.
Yeah,
Those are big questions.
It's just the last two lines of that, really.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to start to put those in the chat. That'd be brilliant. Okay, I'm going to move on because I've got quite a lot to get through, but we will come back to those in a few minutes. So I've got some results from the survey itself, from the questionnaire that we did. So we started off by asking, and I haven't given you all the numbers and the details of who responded, but there were 69 out of, we contacted 307 quality assurance and accreditation bodies, and we had 69 valid responses to that. So this is what this is based on. But the questionnaire was quite long because it's quite complicated. So we actually made it optional whether people filled in every question. And therefore we get a lot of null responses or not applicable responses where they should really have responded. So if you have a look at this first slide, it shows, this is the responses to how important are these, it's actually 7 areas. I split out research and publication. And you can see the majority of the respondents believe that the issues, those 7 issues were either moderately important, very important, or central to their missions. But it was interesting that very few of them covered research and academic publications in the same way that they did the other 5 things. So we knew that there was going to be a better focus on that. So of the 22 interview participants, 7 were from quality assurance bodies, but others were invited from other organisations like the Committee for Publication Ethics and Retraction Watch, and other interesting people, and people from anti-corruption bodies. So it was really interesting doing the interviews because I spoke to some fantastic people, and we wanted to enhance the information that was in the kind of largely quantitative data in the survey, although there were some open questions in there as well. The literature review was really interesting because most of the literature that you would do for an academic study is published sources that are high quality and so on. But a lot of the sources that we had on corruption were journalism, because people don't publish on corruption a lot. And also very modern forms of corruption, very recent forms of corruption tend to be published in the journalistic piece first. But good quality kind of investigative journalism is a good way to find out about it. So I made no excuses to this for this in the write-up. There are times when it's appropriate to use other sources, but you need to be careful about using sources that are less reliable. So it's really important to look at the reliability. So a lot of it was kind of grey literature, and there's a little bit of empirical research, but less so. Really interesting reading, but we also had some videos and things like that as well. So just a quick overview of the findings. Corruption occurs in every part of the world, but the type of corruption and the amount of corruption varies in different parts of the world. The other thing that relates to that first point is that some countries are very, very proactive, and the accreditation bodies in those countries are also very, very proactive, and the governments are as well. So for example, in Albania, Kosovo, countries like that, they were very conscious of the fact there's a high rate of corruption in those countries, and they're trying their best to do something about it to counter it. But if you talk to someone in Nordic countries, in Norway or Sweden or Denmark, for example, about corruption in their country, they would probably deny there was any. Certainly there is less, it's less apparent, they're less open about talking about it, and they get quite embarrassed about it as well if there is corruption in those countries. So, you know, it's the kind of perceptions of corruption are different in different countries. Most quality assurance bodies have a range of sanctions, but they don't use them very often because they don't uncover such evidence like that due to the methods that they use when they audit and they survey the institutions that they are responsible for. The other thing that came out of the findings is we started off with these kind of 6-7 topics, but we also had 3 new themes emerge from the analysis of the results. So we had corruption in higher education governance, which we didn't have as a topic to start with, and we came across quite a lot of them, where the corruption is right at the top of the institution. It might be in the form of, you know, kind of corrupt procurement, typically things like conflicts of interest are being ignored and that kind of thing, but also appointment of officials is done by nepotism, those kind of things. So lots of things came out on the governance side. I've already mentioned the fact that we don't all understand things in quite the same way. When we talk about quality and standard, not everyone has the same view of what that means. It's the same with a lot of other terms as well, and I'll say more about that as we go through. And the other one that came out really powerfully was networking is so important to all of this area. And that is true of what we're doing today, isn't it, really? Networking is such an importantly powerful thing to do, and to share good practice, to share our what we do, to share what works, to share what doesn't work. And that's really why this week of workshops for you is really quite important. So I've put the graphs on here because these have the questions on that we asked, and it actually shows the types of corruption that we'd identified. So on this particular one, which is looking at regulation of higher education, we've got bribery to influence decisions. This is in the regulatory process rather than other things. Ignoring conflicts of interest, unfair practices and appointments, political or commercial interference. So this is corruption within the accreditation bodies themselves. And as you would imagine, because we were dealing with reputable quality assurance agencies, a lot of them completely denied there was any problems with that. So they are concerned about it, but in a very minor way, and they don't associate themselves with all of this. So 64% of the respondents to the questionnaire had no concerns about corruption in this field. Some accreditation bodies are identifying threats and proactively monitoring and supporting providers, and that's particularly in countries like UK, Canada, to some extent USA, Australia. But we did find out that some countries just simply haven't got the capacity to cope with this scale of higher education in their countries. And one prime example of that is in India, where more than 60% of higher education institutions do not have any kind of form of external quality assurance or oversight from external bodies, which is really quite worrying. They are trying to work India is trying to work very strongly about that. I'm not sure whether we've got any participants from India here, or whether you're aware of that, or whether you're aware of any kind of implications from that. But I know India are trying to address it, but it's just such an enormous country with such an enormous higher education sector that's grown. A lot more about that in the report that relates to this. So responses that we found in the from the survey and from the questionnaires, from the interviews as well, there needs to be increased transparency within quality assurance and accreditation model, particularly about panel appointment. So we came across the kind of nepotism, the kind of friends links in Russia particularly, where the accreditation bodies can be corrupt in themselves, and where they accept bribes from institutions to give them a positive report. Not just Russia, but certainly came out in Russia. There's a lot of bureaucracy associated with them. It suggested that random and unannounced visits are conducted so that the institutions don't game the process, because that's what I think was happening. And more regulation of private providers, private institutions in some countries where the private institutions are not regulated, and that there's an independent body to handle complaints, and make sure that any kind of quality bodies are independent from government influence, because that was happening in some institutions. So corruption in the governance of higher education institutions. Now, this was a new topic that wasn't actually part of the categories in the survey. So we found political interference in many countries. Okay, so there is political interference, and most countries, if we look deep enough, we'd find some form of political interference. There we are. There's a lot of countries there on that list, and there are more, I'm sure, that you could find. So political interference is a problem because higher education is supposed to be autonomous, and it's supposed to work independently of the government for the good of education and research. University leaders and professors appointed using fake or undeserved academic qualifications. So you see some of these topics that we've got, these categories are not, they overlap with other categories. So this also overlaps with the credentials and qualifications. But clearly the promotion of professors and university leaders, if you get a university leader who gets there through corrupt means, either through nepotism, through false qualifications, or etc., through not doing the work that their qualifications say they've done, then you'll have a corrupt institution, and you've got no possibility of having any kind of integrity within that institution, and that's a real big problem. And there are lots of examples we found of that. I've actually put some countries in there, but that there are other countries that I could have included in that list as well. I mean, we even came across one in Japan, a very good institution in Japan, for example. So it's not just kind of developing countries; it's quite rich countries as well. That kind of financial mismanagement came up. But this is an interesting one that we hadn't seen before. Inbreeding was the term that was used, and that particularly came out in the Balkan region, where people were encouraged to be appointed back into the institutions where they'd qualified. So you weren't getting this kind of diversity of ideas, you were getting all this kind of internal culture that never changed, because it was a small pool of academics. And I don't know whether anyone, we might not have come across that term before, but the idea that it's actually healthy to have people coming in from outside to manage and to teach in an institution, rather than having the same people kind of staying in that institution for their whole career. So there's some suggestion that quality assurance bodies should pursue any allegations that they come across, and not just assume it's somebody else's problem, which is what we were kind of, the message we were kind of getting. Well, that's not what we do, it's not our problem. Actually, if you're aware of it, you should be doing something about it. If you don't see it as your responsibility, then you need to highlight it to those who have got that responsibility. If it's possible, apply sanctions to try and encourage better performance, and encourage diversity, transparency, accountability. Okay, so the other one that came up was this disparities in key concepts. So the first thing to say is there are no global standards for higher education, and in fact there are, even within some countries there are differences. So for example, in India, the qualifications are not done to any kind of benchmarking standard. In Germany, they have qualifications are done per state, and they're not transferable between states, which is crazy for a country like Germany. So there are no standards. And when I asked you about what you understand by standards, you know, it's really quite important that there is a kind of benchmark of some kind that exists where we know what a qualification means. And it means the same in this country or this part of the country as that part of the country. And that isn't actually the case. You actually look at it very in the cold light of day. We got some criticism that from the surveys that quality assurance bodies were uncritically accrediting international providers, not providing value added. So they were doing it as a kind of commercial service and not actually giving anything back. They were just using it as a money-making exercise. And that was particularly about North American quality assurance bodies. So there were some suggestions about being open about the differences and trying to bring about some kind of common standards. Focus on the enhancement of quality rather than ticking boxes and saying you've got that, got that, got that. It's not about whether you've got policies, it's about how those are working, and encourage dialogue. Okay, so this one is about the teaching role, and as we move through these, you'll see that there is less and less kind of take up from the respondents about these. Very few, only 18 out of the questionnaire respondents had any concerns about the teaching role, but we know there are lots of different types of corruption in teaching, and you might have come across some in your own career. I have no idea. Tell us about it if you have. We know that corruption in the teaching role, there are certain drivers for teachers to behave in a corrupt way. Sometimes it's just a question of the circumstances they find themselves in. It could be due to job insecurity, casualisation. There's an awful lot of people who are not tenured or whatever the equivalent is in different countries, where they have to justify their jobs from year to year to keep in post. Sometimes they have to show that they're passing a certain proportion of students, for example, and that kind of policy drives down standards, or can drive down standards if it's not carefully monitored, and student retention and so on. But also we'll hear about publish or perish, and I'm going to talk to you a lot more about that in the session tomorrow afternoon when we talk about publishing, ethical publishing. But also workloads. Sometimes people simply have too much work to do and they're not paid for preparation work and so on. And therefore they might have several jobs and have to move from one job to another. So it's not possible for them to really be vigilant about integrity and so on. So we can see that as corruption, but perhaps it's just the circumstances, precarity of the situation that staff find themselves in. What came up a lot was bullying, sexual harassment, and that in every country, particularly rich countries. Australia have introduced policies on bullying, sexual harassment. It's coming up in the UK as well. There's a lot of, it tends to be pushed underground. So, and it's the kind of thing that comes up in research quite a lot. So as a researcher, you might possibly be bullied by one of your, I hope not, but you might find someone who's bullied by one of their supervisors. So it can be problematic. So you know, it's important that that people are aware of these forms of corruption, because they are forms of corruption. It's certainly forms of very, very bad practice. It's difficult to identify quite a lot of these problems because people don't come forward with them, and this is why some of these come out from journalism rather than through. Sorry, my battery is running low. It's not plugged in. I just need to do that. So, oh yeah, sorry, we nearly lost power altogether. Then here we go. And the bottom one here is an interesting one: protect whistleblowers, because whistleblowers are not seen as necessarily a good thing in every part of the world. So I'd be interested to hear more about that. I'm going to stop after the next slide, I think, and just have a little pause. This particular one is admissions and I'm going to do two together. So this is admissions and recruitment. Because admissions and recruitment and credentials and qualifications, surprisingly, they have quite a lot in common. So I'm going to do these two together and then we'll have a little pause. On this particular one, fraud in admissions, fraud and corruption, admissions and recruitment. It's a big area of fraud, because if we let students into university that are not qualified to go in, either because they falsified their accreditation or because they get in through some devious means like nepotism, favoritism, and so on, then they don't have the wherewithal to, the kind of the necessary skills to succeed. It's very unlikely that they will succeed. And there's a big scandal that I'm sure you're all aware of in the USA recently, that perhaps Teddy might want to come in and chat to us about that, to do with these sports programs where TV stars, these kind of celebrities, paid for their children to go to university, and it's through these sports programs, and pretended they were sports stars.
It's such a unique situation, because the system of awarding entrance to students who wouldn't qualify academically because they're good at a sport is already its own issue, right? We already have an issue with that in the States, because people who are quite challenged academically are sometimes allowed to come to university, and then they are given a lot of extra help to succeed, which, giving people extra help to succeed seems like a great thing, but that help isn't available to everyone. And so, that's already a mess. And then on top of all of that, people whose students were neither qualified academically nor qualified for a sports scholarship pretended that their students were qualified for sports. And because the qualifications, if you are gifted athletically, were so much more relaxed, and also because those programs often don't have sufficient oversight. In other words, the coaches were allowed to basically let in whoever they wanted. It created an opportunity for people to get their students in who wouldn't have been qualified otherwise. And there are a number of harms that come from that, but one of the big harms is that it kind of confirmed to a lot of students who had ambitions of going to university that the system is rigged and it doesn't really depend on your qualifications. I mean, it was quite demoralizing, even though people knew that it was already possible to do that if you were if you were gifted athletically. And then the final capper, I think, to all of that is that we had discussions where I guess it was highlighted that the parents of those children, the normal way, if you could see me, I'm doing air quotes, the normal way for parents with that much money to get their children into university is to make a donation. And so that's yet a third level of corruption, right? So it's like an onion of corruption inside corruption, all within a system where people generally pride themselves. I mean, it is not uncommon at all for leaders of institutions in the US to think, oh, we don't have corruption like X and Y countries. And what was so illuminating is we have our own brand of corruption, and for the most part, it's right out there in the open where people can see it.
Absolutely.
I hope that's what you were looking for, Irene.
It was exactly what I was looking for. It was better from you than from me, because you're living that. And
yes.
When we did this survey, it was just before that news all broke. But we still reported on that practice, even though we hadn't had that scandal at the time that this was published.
Yep.
It was quite shocking, but it was there. So, but you see, it isn't just developing countries that suffer from it; it's every country. But it does, as I said at the start, it kind of varies from country to country. We get things like with international students where people fake their English tests, so when they arrive they can't speak English, and so they're doomed to failure to start with when they arrive, unless they cheat by other means to get by, which is crazy. So it's important when we look at corruption, when we look at integrity, that we don't just focus on the assessment process, we focus on the whole of the way the university operates, because otherwise you'll miss some of these types of cheating and corruption that happen. So this particular one, and I wanted to put these two together, the credentials and qualifications, because there's quite a lot of overlap here. And I mentioned this Groningen Declaration Network in the previous one, I didn't talk about it. But this is a network of organisations that are largely nationally based, that keep secure digital qualifications, so that they are a verification service, and the network actually links them all together. So I wanted to check whether a Chinese qualification was a good qualification. I could go into the DDM through the UK organisation, which is a company, it's actually run by JISC, but it's a company called Prospects, which is part of JISC now. And they are connected to their Chinese counterpart, and they get that qualification for me. So it's a really, it's growing, it's developing, but it's a very interesting development that's dealing with this idea of credential fraud. But you can see from the figures there, only a third of the respondents were aware of, had any concerns about this, but it's a big international problem. So it worried me hugely, and my colleagues as well, how little understanding there was about this field, because it's really quite worrying. And there's a lot of, and I'm not going to say much about this because I know Amelia is going to pick up on this. There's a lot of evidence about plagiarized doctoral theses and fake doctoral qualifications there as well that we picked up. So you'll hear a lot more about that from Amelia in a few minutes. So in terms of what can be done, there really needs to be more evidence, more kind of highlighting of this fraud practices, and more requirements for institutions to do something about it. And the quality bodies should really be monitoring what they're doing and checking whether they're actually aware of these problems and what they're doing to overcome them. There are some whitelists of accredited providers. I think NARIC provides one. And it was on the earlier slide. They provide a list of accredited providers, and we certainly use that to look up where we have students coming in. In terms of credentials and qualifications, and actually the admissions and recruitment also applies to admitting and recruiting staff as well as students. It's not just about student fraud, it's about staff fraud as well. And the credentials and qualifications, the digital verification services need to be publicised and used more. But also we should follow up on evidence and work with whistleblowers and anti-corruption organisations to help with that. There's an awful lot more of that. And I put this on a single slide because the assessment, and there were a lot of categories that we had under the assessment, because this is the thing we focus on most of all when we talk about integrity. And the most popular, if I can say popular, the most concerning areas were plagiarism, and which was the other one, plagiarism and cheating in exams. But the others, there was surprisingly little concern about contract cheating, about either the companies themselves or the SNLs, which is very worrying because we know that is a global problem. So only 25 of the respondents expressed any concerns. Only 19 of those 69 registered any concerns about SNLs and contract cheating, which is worrying because it means that people think they haven't got a problem with that, and there is a big problem. So in terms of what we came across where student cheating is seen as culture acceptable, and that we've seen in all the research we've done in some parts of the world, cheating by students is seen as normal. It's seen as a game. It's something that they do. Oh yeah, we were caught that time. and the stakes are fairly low, so it doesn't matter if they're caught. So we need to kind of break that cycle and find a way to do that. So there's software available now, but sometimes it's completely misused. I'm sure you'll hear more about that as I think there's a session on software, so I won't talk too much about that, but it needs to be used in the right way. We need to raise much more awareness of contract cheating, but we've come a long way with that. And I think the International Day of Action has helped a lot with that. We know that contract cheating companies blackmail students, and they also sell on their data and do all sorts of other evil things. And again, I'm sure if you haven't heard already, you'll know more about that by the end of this week. It's difficult to know how much corruption by students is not picked up by lecturers for whatever reason, and because we simply don't know what we don't know. But certainly in my own institution, I've had a big awareness raising campaign, and we've suddenly got a massive number of extra cases this year which we're trying to deal with. Some accreditation bodies are dealing with the threats. They tend to be mainly Anglophone ones, but there are some others as well that are dealing with it. And I know Lithuania are very busy and, you know, actively involved in that, and other countries too. Suggest to stay abreast of the threats and to network and share ideas and share good practice and so on. Okay, trying to move through. There's a lot in here. So I'm on to research and publication, which very few of the people that responded to this survey, the 69 respondents, had any interest in this area at all, which is very worrying, because actually academic publishing and research, if you have corruption in those fields within an institution, within a higher education institution, then it says something about the culture within that institution. And so if you don't have your finger on the, you know, the pulse of that institution in terms of how it's dealing with you know, the corruption within its research, then you don't understand fully what the culture is within the institution in terms of its education and other areas. So only 18 out of 69 gave any response to that question, which is a bit worrying. Many don't have it included in their remit, and they don't see it themselves responsible for it. But actually, I say, even if it's not part of their direct remit, it's indirectly important to them. There's some evidence that some countries, particularly ones I've named on that point there, have strengthened their policies recently and introduced new guidance. Switzerland has just last week, the week before, introduced some new guidance. We know peer review can be corrupted and subject to corruptive scams, and that leads to all sorts of fake science being, you know, I'll do Teddy's kind of response there. So fake science gets published. We're going to talk about predatory publishing to you tomorrow, so I won't say too much about that now, but you know, the publishing industry as a whole, ethical publishing, unethical publishing. So there's lots more here. So suggestions, even if it's not directly under the remit, they should be concerned about it. So I think at that point I'm going to just a little bit about networking, and I mentioned Amelia here, but also our dear friend Debbie and Andre in Russia, and also anti-corruption organizations like ORCA in Kosovo. So the activists and the ombuds people and so on, lots of people networking and sharing information to try and raise awareness about corruption and how you can fight it and so on. And Amelia's going to say more about that when she comes up. So, yes, good. So I've come to a kind of question side. So I'm going to pause for breath now. I'm very near the end of my presentation. There's a lot in there that I didn't want to leave anything out, because I think it's all really important just to see the extent of it, because it's massive, you know, and you actually look at where corruption can occur within higher education, within research, it's massive. And I've really just skimmed over most of it, but there's a lot came out of the research, and a lot of it didn't go into the report because the report would have been massive otherwise. So I'm going to pause now, and I hope that my colleagues have been looking at the chat and what's in there. There's lots of really interesting stuff. Anybody want to come in and have a chat? Teddy or Amelia, have you had a look at the chat there? Anything interesting?
Sure. I think one of the most interesting things that people were talking about on the chat was with respect to the scandal that you mentioned in the US. People were talking about the fact that it had actually become a documentary on Netflix, which I was unaware of. I actually had to go look because I followed the scandal, but I didn't even know that it had become a Netflix documentary. And then apparently there's controversy over that because the people who are actually involved in the Netflix documentary are being sued for defamation of character. So people who are
I actually have seen the Netflix one. Yeah, it's really worth watching.
I'm going to have to do that.
Really, it's quite scary, but it's worth watching.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is that I don't think anybody who is involved in higher education in the US has ever not been aware of the fact that it is possible to, give a gift to the school, or, have a talk with the chancellor when you're a movie star or whatever. We have all kinds of that. And that's one of the kinds of corruption that is the most blatant and the most accepted in the US. And we haven't gotten to talk about this yet in the chat, but one of the things that has been a frequent topic of conversation within the academic community is the role of scandals. Tracy used to say that they were a great opportunity for us because they brought attention to the things that we needed to pay attention to, and also gave some incentives for colleges and universities to pay attention to it. Because if you were the school that had a scandal, obviously you wanted to make some changes, but also if you were a school that didn't have the scandal, but you knew you had those things going on, and it just had no light had been shed on it yet, that's a great incentive for you to start trying to fix things before you become the subject of a scandal. So
yeah, and I think that was one of the reasons Australia is so ahead of us in contract cheating research is the scandal that my master's scandal that they had a few years back kind of kick-started all their research and enabled lots of funding to do research in that field. So yeah, good things can come out of bad things, but you wouldn't want to be the institution at the center of the scandal, would you really?
Right. And that loops right back to what we were talking about whistleblowers. One of the hazards of academic integrity work is not only being a whistleblower, but also just being the person who has that conversation and always brings up academic integrity issues. There's a lot of resistance in many Western countries, at universities in many Western countries, to admit that there is cheating going on at their university. It was one of the big challenges in getting people to take ICAI survey, but really to participate in any kind of academic integrity research, because the administrators and the boards of directors would prefer to maintain the illusion that there isn't any corruption there. So it's one of those balancing acts that those of us in academic integrity frequently have to walk. And when I talk to newspapers, for instance, I'm always really careful when they ask me about a particular institution to make sure that they know, like, we're focusing on this institution, but cheating happens at all the institutions. Yeah. Or, this, yes, we're looking at this one, but please don't write this story and make it sound like, oh, this institution has a cheating problem, when these are very much cultural phenomena. I mean, in places around the world, and I would say that this is much more the rule than the exception, in places around the world where society has accepted that people with lots of money or people with lots of fame will get special treatments. We have an opportunity to just shed some light on that and say, hey, is that really something that we want to accept? Because that is one difference I see. Like, you're absolutely right when you say corruption is everywhere, but I see a point of demarcation between societies where the corruption is very much accepted and where the corruption inspires outrage. And those places where we still have outrage, I think we have an easier road, because at least people universally acknowledge, or not universally, but widely acknowledge that it is a problem. Whereas the places where we just accept, oh yeah, the wealthy people get to do whatever they want, or the people who are movie stars or influencers or whoever it is, they get special treatment and the rest of us are the only ones who have to follow the rules. That's it's not impossible, but it's a more challenging place for us to be, because we have to persuade people that it's a problem.
Just going to the bit about quality now. So I didn't get a chance to read those earlier because I'm too busy focusing on what I was saying. So there's some really good points made here. Quality is in part consistency between the aims of education and what students bring from it. Yeah, that's good. Quality in student admission, quality in assessment, quality in guidance. Yeah, so quality, that's a really good point, because quality applies not just to the qualifications, it applies to the teaching, it applies to the feedback, it applies to the experience as well. I think quality education research is looking what the student learns and to be willing to make a contribution to the field. Absolutely. absolutely. A rigor and challenge in education. Yeah, thanks Teddy for that. All require quality in the employment of academics. Yeah, so quality and standards apply to everything I've talked about, not just the student work, who they are, the qualifications themselves, and it should define the culture of the institution. Yeah, so the quality is met by the standards. That's absolutely right. So I'm going to move on because we Osgo. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name.
No, it's no problem, Irene. I just have a personal story about the first question, and I want to talk about it.
Yes, please.
We have, international students. I'm not going to tell the name of the country of the student, but one day a student came to me and said, "Sir, I have failed in your class, and how much should I pay to pass the class?"
Yeah.
I said, "What?" And he asked me how much should he pay to pay the class. I said, "Is this normal, do you think?" And he said, "Yes, this is normal in my country." Then I learned that in that particular country, teacher salaries were really low. And this situation is something like a secondary income for teachers. Students who fail the class would pay to the teacher, and they passed the class. And this became a norm in that country. So corruption is directly related to economy, I guess.
Yeah, and it's very sad, isn't it? So can I ask you what you did about that? What did you say to the student?
I told him that it's not impossible to do that. It may be normal in your country, but here it's impossible to pay and pass the class.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up the part about the students or the teachers' salaries, because that's one of those examples of where the practice of corruption has really become institutionalized, right? Nobody might ever say those words that, the only way that teachers can make a living is by taking the money from the students, right? Because their salary isn't sufficient. I'm familiar with at least 2 countries where that is the case, where it's just built into the system that it's expected that the students will pay the teachers. And in one of the countries specifically, they call it tutoring. Like, so the teacher teaches a class and then they have what they call tutoring. And the tutoring doesn't really consist of instruction. And that's where that's why I remember that they called it tutoring, because I was confused. I was like, well, that seems legit if they are paying for extra tutoring outside, as long as the teacher doesn't give them any favoritism. And someone said, "Teddy, the favoritism is the point." And I was
tutoring.
like, oh.
Yeah.
I didn't understand.
The other term that I've come across that I didn't understand what it meant, I had to get Stella to tell me what it meant, and that was in Africa. And that term was sorting.
Yes.
Sorting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll sort you out. I think that's what it is. Yeah, very worrying. And it's worrying that the student thinks it's okay to do that, isn't it? And I had another anecdote about that somebody told me, not from my personal experience, of a teacher running a test, and they each have to put the money on their desk that they paid to pass the test. And the teacher will collect the money up during the test, and if the student doesn't have the money, they're not going to pass the test. And the other variation on that is they have to buy the textbook that the teacher is selling to them directly in order to pass. So there are lots of little, these are kind of minor practices that go on in some countries, and in some cases within an institution, just individual lecturers will require that kind of attention to detail. So I put some questions there about what types of corruption you've come across. I don't know whether you want to put something in the I don't know whether you can be anonymous within the chat. I think you can. You can actually. There is a way to bring about anonymity. What is being done to counter corruption who is responsible for fighting it? And I would say everyone is. So I would say, you know, in terms of responsibilities, yes, the quality assurance agencies have a role, but actually everybody at every level is responsible for fighting corruption and for raising corruption. And I know it's difficult if you're in a culture where corruption is seen as, it's normalized and therefore it's seen as okay. It's difficult to fight it. And so, you know, it's also dangerous as well in some cases to fight it if you know, if you're in a country where, I can see Amelia's nodding there, and I've certainly come across that situation. And I mentioned earlier on Andrei Rostov from Russia, I can't remember how to pronounce his surname, but he is part of an organization called Disparities. And I was really quite concerned about his well-being. And he shared with me a video, which has gone, it's disappeared now, otherwise I'd share it with you, where he showed a hole in his, I think he's on the 5th floor of a block of flats, and there was a bullet hole in his window from a gun, you know, that somebody had shot at his kitchen window. Quite scary. It was hidden behind a pot plant. And he just left it there because it's quite fun to have this bullet hole in you. But it really worries me that some people are really quite brave. And Amelia, I would put you in that category as well, being a very brave person. But we all have a role to play where we can, but we need to bear in mind our own personal safety. So actions we can take. Strategic plan, changing mindset. So if you're in a position of influence, so if we've got, for example, if you're aware of corruption that's going on, and you are in a position to influence, then use that power. Introduce changes gradually, but you need to consult and you need consensus to do that within the whole community. It's hard when it depends where you're starting from, doesn't it? It depends on the baseline. Engage with issues, don't just pretend to comply with whatever the problem is. Appeal beyond existing loyalty. So people often don't comply because they feel loyalty to somebody who is responsible or somebody who is engaged in these issues, and it's very difficult to break that cycle. Introduce strong, transparent, consistent policies and try to bring people with you. And I think, you know, I've just been responsible for updating my own institution's policy. Hard work, very, very hard work, to try and get them implemented and try and get people to buy into what you're trying to do. Value, promote integrity, and be clear about what you mean by things, but communicate and share good practice, which is what we're doing now. And I think, and I've conducted research, I think I'm at the end now, so a little bit there on conclusions. So I'm going to move on. Do we want a little break now? We've been going an hour and a bit. So do we want a little break before
it seems like a good time.
Should we start again at what should we say? At 12:30, and then we'll have time to just have a little break, and perhaps we can well I'll hand over to Amelia to after the break. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing mine now, and then feel free to have chats in between if you wish. We'll just leave everything open. Talk between yourselves. Do you want to talk about what you've heard? Either open your mics and have a chat, or put it in the chat box, and I'll come back in about. We'll all come back in about 20 minutes, so a quarter of an hour. Okay. Somebody be brave enough to say something. Hi everyone, 2-minute warning.
Thank you.
Okay, we all back again, I hope so. I made a cup of tea, haven't managed to drink it yet, but I'll drink it while I'm listening to Amelia, I hope. So I think I'm going to hand over to Amelia, unless, Tony, anything you want to add?
No, I can't wait to hear what Amelia has to say because
me
she's going to
too.
talk to us about fraud.
Me too. So, Amelia, the floor's all yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen just a bit. Okay. I hope you can see now my, just a second.
Thanks. Yes, we got it.
Move here. Okay. Okay, just a second to see. Okay. Well, my presentation. Sorry, my name is Emilia Sherkan, and I'm a PhD and senior lecturer at the Faculty of Journalism and Communication Science within University of Bucharest. And the title of my talk is Political Influence on Plagiarism Decisions, Plagiarism Networks and Academic Corruption. I have a disclaimer for this talk. I am an investigative journalist specialized in discovering plagiarism in doctoral dissertation and academic fraud. And in the last 6 years, I've wrote 117 articles, of which 32 were about plagiarism or self-plagiarism cases in doctoral dissertations. And after my articles, 15 doctoral titles were permanently withdrawn. Of course, after they were analyzed by a national academic committee that was empowered to do this. And the subject of my revealing were ministers, generals, judges, prosecutors, or senior state officials. My talk today will have a brief introduction and I will present also 3 case studies that are explaining how a doctoral dissertation can be transformed into a moral and professional trafficated title with the complicity of the political class. And in the second part, I will present and explain the concept of plagiarism network. And for this presentation, this presentation is based on an empirical research, and the information presented is obtained through direct observation or from my experience as an investigative journalist. Why a PhD matter? A PhD matters because a doctoral degree is the highest academic qualification a university or a research institution can provide. A doctoral degree can bring a university career, prestige, or other types of social aspiration as political, governmental, or corporative positions. Probably you are aware about some plagiarism scandals in Europe in recent years. In last 10 years, many accusations of plagiarism in doctoral dissertation of different top politicians, government officials, or senior servants from different countries around Europe has risen. And there are a very well-known case of Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, who is the former Minister of Defense in Germany and who resigned in 2011 after the plagiarism scandal. And another very well-known case is the one of Annette Schavan, who was former Minister of Education in Germany and who resigned also after the plagiarism scandal in 2013. Another scandal was in Hungary. The president of Hungary, Paul Schmidt, plagiarized his doctoral dissertation in physical education, and he resigned. It was in 2012. And also the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was accused in 2018 that he plagiarized his doctoral dissertation in economics, but he didn't resign and he denied the allegations. Well, with this introduction about the atmosphere in Europe, I will go to the Romanian cases. The first one I choose is the Victor Pontas case. Victor Ponta, who was prime minister in 2012 when a very big scandal broke in Romania. What I have to tell you also is that Romania has been shaken in the last almost 10 years by several big plagiarism. But probably Victor Ponta has a particularity because it is the first one, very well known, and probably the first that really attracted the public interest on doctoral dissertation. Well, he was accused that he plagiarized his doctoral dissertation in law in 2012. And the reveal was made by Nature magazine in June. And for political class in Bucharest, it felt like a real earthquake. This is a print screen of the Nature magazine article about the case of his plagiarism dissertation. What happened in that moment? Nature magazine wrote that 85 pages from Pontas' doctoral dissertation were plagiarized, and the evidence presented in the journal was overwhelming. the Prime Minister announced that he will resign if an official committee will confirm the plagiarism. And the key word of his declaration was official committee. In order to save his political position and career, the Minister of Education, who was his subordinate in government, abolished the National Academic Committee empowered to analyze all plagiarism accusation in doctoral dissertations. And even the Romanian university have academic autonomy. We have a centralized system from the communism period. And for confirming a doctoral title granted by a university, this academic national committee has to confirm the granting of a doctoral title. And so this committee was abolished, but it's very interesting to see how the process was made. Well, the ministerial order to abolish the commission was signed by the Minister of Education while the committee was meeting for taking a decision. And and the order was sent to the committee in that morning by a courier, and also in order not to the commission not to be able to announce its decision in the building where the meeting was held, the electricity was cut off. They just imagine that if they will send to the public their decision, and if the decision will be that the doctoral dissertation is plagiarized, they imagine that everything will be lost, and probably Victor Ponta was put in the position to accept that the dissertation is plagiarized and that it is necessary to resign. Well, the public reason announced for the dissolution of that commission could not. The public reason announced by the Minister of Education for dissolving that commission could not even verify if they said that that committee was not empowered to verify any kind of politician. So they said an academic committee is not has not the right to analyze a politician, a dissertation of a politician. And the Minister of Education basically signed a new ministerial order and empowered another committee named National Ethical Commission. And this National Ethical Commission decided at that moment in 2012 that Victor Ponta's dissertation is not plagiarized. And after Victor Ponta resigned as the Prime Minister in 2015, the committee abolished by the Minister of Education was reestablished. That National Academic Committee. And this committee finally analyzed Ponta's doctoral dissertation, and the PhD title was withdrawn in 2016. But it took a very long way from the moment when the scandal broke up in Nature magazine till the moment the dissertation the doctoral title was withdrawn for plagiarism. Well, Victor Ponta was, as I told you, the main scandal in Romania, but there are other cases of very, let's say, very particular with some particularities. And this is the one of Gabriel Oprea. Maybe the name is not so important because probably there are so many plagiarism cases in Romania that we can change the name with other politicians and other, I don't know, top officials of the state. Well, this case has a particularity indeed, and before Victor Ponta's case, plagiarism and academic integrity was a marginal issue for Romanian higher education community. And this is very sad because it's very early in time. So just 10 years ago, we didn't used to speak in Romania about academic integrity or plagiarism or ethical values in higher education. So this case of Gabriel Oprea just transformed the public agenda and academic integrity into an important issue for the whole academic community. In 2015, Gabriel Oprea was Vice Prime Minister of Romania. He was basically the deputy of Victor Ponta. And he also was appointed as interim prime minister when Victor Ponta underwent a surgery and was unable to move for 2 weeks. Oprea also was professor at the National Intelligence Academy within Romanian Intelligence Service, and he was also a PhD supervisor at that moment. His case was a tipping point for revealing a moral and systemic corruption in doctoral studies in military universities. Gabriel Oprea is an emblematic case for the transition period from communism to democracy. And he was a former army officer and an aspiring businessman when he defended his doctoral dissertation in law. It was in January 2001. He became very soon, in June, professor at the National Defense College, who was not a university and had not the right to organize competitions for teaching positions. But he became, don't ask me why, because I don't know how to answer to this. It's very unusual to organize this kind of competition for a teaching position if you are not a university institution. He immediately transferred to Police Academy, who was a university, subordinated to the Minister of Interior. And very soon after this, in August 2002, he became a PhD supervisor at the Police Academy. And after 5 years, he transferred to National Intelligence Academy within Romanian Intelligence Service, who is the biggest intelligence service in the country. And although the educational law forbade a transfer between universities, well, he did it again, of course, against the law. So not one time, but 2 times, and each time against the law. Just 1 year and 2 months after he became professor and PhD supervisor, he also, let's say, had the first PhD student that graduate and obtain a doctoral title in the Police Academy. And this student was the director of the Romanian intelligence service. I will give you more information just a bit later. Gabriel Oprea academic career is linked with his political ascension, and immediately after he became a general in military justice, he resigned from the army, and he became a politician. He entered in a political party who was the ruling party at that moment. He also was during the years deputy senator. He was 3 or 4 times a minister in different governments. He was Minister for Public Administration. He was Minister of Defense. He was also Minister of Internal Affairs for 2 times, and Deputy Prime Minister between 2012 and 2015. As a professor and doctoral supervisor, he founded 2 doctoral domains that are unique in the world: public order and national security in 2012 at the Police Academy, and intelligence and national security in 2007 at the National Intelligence Academy. Any of these doctoral domains are not belonging to any known science, and they are not scientific domains. But starting with 2002 and until this moment, 1,300 doctoral titles were granted in these 2 domains, and most of them are plagiarized. Well, it's an affirmation that I am, I assume to make this affirmation because I saw many doctoral in public order and national security, and they were plagiarized. And probably you'll understand just a bit later why I am assuming to make this affirmation, to say this. Well, Gabriel Oprea supervised 22 PhD students, starting with 2002 when he became a doctoral supervisor, 9 at the Police Academy and 13 at National Intelligence Academy. A shocking discovery for me was the moment when Police Academy and National Intelligence Academy confirmed from public documents that in almost 15 years as a university professor, Gabriel Oprea never held any academic course in these 2 institutions. So he was a professor without courses, and he was a PhD supervisor without enter in a class and have a course in front of some students. Well, I told you earlier that I will speak about a bit about the doctoral students of Gabriel Oprea. At the Police Academy, he supervised the chief of the Romanian intelligence service in the office at that moment. This former director of CRI completed his studies in 1 year and 5 months, very, very fast. In Romania at that moment, the period, it was 4 years. And he also supervised 2 deputies chief of the Romanian intelligence service. The first deputy chief of the general prosecutor in Romania, the general prosecutor of the prosecutor's office attached to Bucharest Court of Appeal, who is one of the biggest courts in the country. Also, he supervised the deputy chief of the Romanian police, the deputy chief of the Romanian border police, a deputy chief of the money laundering service in the Romanian police. And at the National Intelligence Academy, he supervised the first deputy chief of the Romanian intelligence service at that moment, the head of the National Intelligence Community subordinated to the Supreme Court, Supreme Council of National Defense, a minister of defense, a minister of internal affairs, another first deputy of the general attorney of Romania, who still is in office in this moment. Well, but probably one of the most, not one of the most outrageous case is the one of his secretary, who obtained a doctoral title in public order and national security. And she also was decorated by the Romanian president at the proposal of Gabriel Ofra, his boss, of course, with the Romanian star, which is the highest decoration the Romanian state can grant to a civilian. And well, that's not all with his students, doctoral students. In 2015, the doctoral dissertation of the first deputy chief of the Romanian intelligence service at that moment, who was also considered one of the most powerful men in the country, has disappeared from the National Library. And this thesis was borrowed by the Polytechnic University, that refused to return it for many years. For almost 5 years, they refused to return it. Finally, that copy was returned to the National Library after a panel file was opened, and after I wrote about the disappearance of the PhD the PhD dissertation from the National Library. And at this moment, no one can testify if that copy returned to the National Library is the original one or not. So we will probably never find the answer to this question. Of course, there are some consequences of this case. The same political commission that tried to save Victor Ponta from a plagiarism verdict in 2012 decided that Gabriel Oprea doctoral dissertation is not plagiarized. And despite this verdict, National Intelligence Academy asked him to resign, and an internal reform of the institution has started at that moment. It was 2015. Well, anyway, after the committee abolished in 2012 was re-empowered 4 years later, after the government was changed, Gabriel Oprea's doctoral title was withdrawn, and also I have to tell you that National Intelligence Academy started an internal reform. They brought a new rector who was empowered to reform the whole institution, but especially the doctoral school. And they took an unexpected decision university institution in country. They effectively decided to verify all the doctoral dissertation defended in the institution ever. And there were 85 doctoral dissertation defended starting with 2007, and 40 of them were reported for plagiarism. And the result was pretty shocking, because 40 out of 85 is a very huge number. And also other 5 dissertation of some public, some people with a high public position in the state were not reported by them, although media wrote that they were plagiarized. So the total of problematic dissertation is 85, basically, not, 45, not 40. And from this total of official 40 doctoral dissertation reported for plagiarism, 10 doctoral titles withdrawn were of some students supervised by Gabriel Oprea. Well, Oprea case shows his personal network that has captured the institutional structure of National Intelligence Academy, but at the Police Academy, which is the third case I prepare for you, a real network of academic imposture has developed and captured the whole institution right after Gabriel Oprea founded the first doctoral domain unique in the world, that public order and national security. If the case of Gabriel Oprea and Victor Ponta have personal and institutional implications, the case of Police Academy has systemic implications. Sorry, what is special for the Police Academy case is that tens of professors that are tenured in the institution are suspected of plagiarism in their doctoral dissertations that were defended in the Police Academy in that domain unique in the world that not corresponded to any science, and that was founded in 2002 by Gabriel Oprea. Well, the Police Academy also started a kind of internal analysis with a similarity software of the doctoral dissertations, and this analysis showed that 20 professors have very high similarity indices, but this suspicion of plagiarism were never verified by an academic committee. And what I have to tell you is that they verified just some of the doctoral dissertation defended after 2011, not all of them. So, of course, they didn't verify the dissertation defended before 2011, between 2002 and 2011. So it is a very big gap. And the Romanian law permits to someone to be tenured in the institution that where defended the doctoral dissertation. I know that in United States it's forbidden. Well, what is a certainty is that the current rector of the Police Academy plagiarized his both of his 2 doctoral dissertations. So is a very special rector with 2 doctoral dissertations, both of them plagiarized. A deputy rector also plagiarized his doctoral dissertation, and another deputy rector plagiarized or recycled the content in 27 books and 15 scientific articles. And that's not all. 4 out of the 6 deans in the institution also plagiarized their doctoral dissertations, and the former rector of the Police Academy, who also plagiarized his doctoral dissertation, has the doctoral title permanently withdrawn by that National Academic Commission. Well, the other doctoral dissertation of the people in the that are in ruling positions in the Police Academy, they are just now in the process of official verification, analyzing of their doctoral dissertations. Well, if you remember the Minister of Education that abolished in 2012 the National Academic Committee empowered to analyze all plagiarism accusation in doctoral dissertation. Well, if you remember that man, he became a PhD student at the Police Academy in 2015, and he defended he was preparing basically to defend his thesis in 2018 in the summer. He was 2 times Minister of Education, and at the moment of the public defending, he was the acting president of the Educational Committee in the Romanian Senate. And before the defending, I decided to analyze his thesis, and also I decided to assist to the defending process. And well, I found that the thesis was plagiarized to a considerable extent, but the PhD supervisor and the 3 members of the reviewing committee considered that the thesis is a very good one, and they recommended the publication of it. When the public was able to ask questions in the process of defending, in the defending process, I asked the committee if they are aware that parts of the thesis are plagiarized. Well, finally, the defending committee decided not to grant him the doctoral title even 10 minutes earlier. They were very, I don't know how to say, they were very convinced that the thesis could be published, and it is a very good one. Well, I mentioned earlier the term academic imposter network, but I would prefer to use the term plagiarism network. And probably you are asking what plagiarism network is. I will try to define it, but first of all, I need to put the network concept in the context. Well, Romania is a former communist country, and social networks in post-communist countries covered informal practices related with politics, economics, or social dimensions. And these have taken different forms. Clientelism nexus, trust, influence of information networks, and For example, Rasma Carlings assigns the high level of corruption in former communist states to hidden power networks that are using public institutions in a personal interest. The informal personal networks are highly developed and widespread in post-communist countries, especially in the political and economic area. Very often for referring to these informal networks, it is used terms as clan or clique or even mafia. Informal groups and networks have shaped the Romanian educational system, including legislative, normative and administrative decisions, but also the institutional structure of the universities and research centers, and also the distribution of the funding and human resources, and even the academic development. Well, some of these things were pointed by Irene earlier as being touched by corruption in different forms. Well, I define the plagiarism network as the relationship between key actors involved in the process of granting doctoral titles. And here are the decision makers, I mean politicians and institutions, execution factors as military universities, but could be also civilian universities, procedure coordinators, which are PhD supervisor and the reviewers, members in the committee of reviewers, and beneficiaries who are doctoral students. There are two different situations in which a plagiarism network are formed, in the doctoral process, but also could be in the academic activity. And in the doctoral process, a key role in the plagiarism network has the doctoral supervisor, who is the one that contributes to degree competition. And the plagiarism network can occur when a PhD supervisor failed to do his job, and when he or she select for the defending commission reviewers who are not verifying the thesis, or who are or who do it superficially, basically who are not doing their jobs in the defending process. And on the other hand, in the academic activity, a key role in the plagiarism network has a professor interested in a rapid career advancement. And this professor may attract other people to sign together books or scientific articles resulted from plagiarism or recycled content. And I gave you earlier the example of the vice rector of Police Academy, who published 27 recycled or plagiarized books and 15 articles, pretended scientific articles. Well, in Police Academy, most of the professors are involved to a greater or a lesser extent in plagiarism networks for doctorates or for academic activity. And of course, all these have consequences. An internal verifying process with the software for identifying similarities in doctoral dissertations. The result was that over 74% of the doctoral dissertation defended at the Police Academy during 2011 and 2015 are suspected of plagiarism. But as I told you earlier, these suspicions have never been verified by a commission, or an internal commission or an external one. And last autumn, the Police Academy became the first Romanian university that lost the right to grant doctoral degrees as a result of some sanctions applied by the Minister of Education. Of course, due to violation of academic ethics rules, and due to refuse to analyze plagiarism suspicion in doctoral dissertations. And couple of months ago, in late April, the Minister of Internal Affairs, to which Police Academy is subordinated, have decided to reorganize the Police Academy and to abolish the 2 doctoral schools of the institution. So now the Police Academy entered into a reorganizational process, and starting with this autumn, they will not organize any more contest for accepting new PhD students. In the last six years, more than 50 top officials were accused of plagiarism in their PhD dissertations, and 2 of them were prime ministers. It was also a vice prime minister, 2 ministers of internal affairs, a minister of education, a minister of defense, a minister of health, the deputy general attorney of Romania, the chief of the national anti-corruption directorate, the vice president of the Superior Council of Magistracy, the chief of the judicial inspection, members of parliament, prosecutors, judges, army generals, intelligence generals, police casters, mayors, rectors, professors, businessmen, and basically almost everyone in a public position who had a doctoral title was suspected of plagiarism, and some of them had official complaints, and many of them in this moment have the doctoral title permanently withdrawn. Well, the result of the public exposure of all these cases is that starting with 2016, 122 plagiarism complaints were registered in Romania. Before 2016, any plagiarism complaints was registered, if you can imagine this. So plagiarism is an issue starting with 2016. And 62 doctoral titles were withdrawn, 26 doctoral titles were maintained, and other 34 complaints are under review. As I told you at the beginning of my talk, 10 years ago, academic integrity was a marginal issue for the Romanian higher education community. But after the revealing of some particular cases, as Victor Ponta or Gabriel Oprea, and after the National Academic Committee empowered to analyze all plagiarism dissertation or plagiarism accusation in doctoral dissertation was reestablished in 2016. The analysis of these complaints has begun. It was a I don't know, it was a complicated process to be in this point, in this moment. And of course, the system reacts because they couldn't accept to be exposed. After media started to publish more inquiries about plagiarism in doctoral dissertations, the educational law was changed in order to give a legal possibility to someone to renounce to his or her PhD title based on a written request. So now you can fill a piece of paper and just to say that you want to renounce your PhD title, and it's fine. So the politicians give this possibility. Well, the Constitutional Court said that this is not constitutional to renounce the title without a verification. So you can fill that request and ask to renounce, but before of this, your dissertation has to be analyzed to see if it is a plagiarized one or not. And another reaction of the system, another reaction of the system was that some politicians, included the Minister of Education in office in this moment, announced that they are sustaining a form of amnesty for doctoral dissertations defended before 2011. Well, why 2011? Because that was the year when the current educational law was adopted. And because all these attempts to block the analysis of accusation did not work, many of the ones accused of plagiarism now are trying to suspend the plagiarism complaints in the court. So basically, they try to suspend the complaints and to block the process of analyzing their doctoral dissertations. So it's very interesting because now it is a new legal dimension on all this thing here in Romania. Well, parallel with the political system, the academic system reacted to the avalanche of revealing about plagiarism in doctoral dissertation. And in recent years, doctoral dissertations start to be rejected for poor quality, and also tens of doctoral dissertations were postponed from the defending process. Another huge number of the huge number of defending doctoral defending thesis that was before 2016 decreased very much, and also the number of the ones that are now willing to become a doctoral student decreased very much in the last 2 or 3 years. And starting with 2018, Romania has mandatory academic integrity courses in faculties, which I consider is the most important change that happened for us, for our higher education system, and of course for academia. Well, it's very important because these mandatory academic integrity courses are also in faculty level, in bachelor level, in master level, and in doctoral level as well. Well, and finally conclusions. Well, PhD titles were very attractive for politicians, civil servants, intelligence officers, servicemen without any real interest or connection with academia. And doctoral titles have been transformed during the years into a morally and professionally trafficked title. And this was possible with complicity of political class who tried to help plagiarists not to be punished somehow. And anyway, top politicians have influenced during the years the legislation regarding doctoral titles granting process, and also it's an important conclusion that exposing politicians contribute to a change in academic community to promote and implement some changes in academic integrity policies. But for sure, the process will be a very long one, and I would say that we are just at the beginning of the changing process. And thank you so much. I will stop my share because I saw many comments in the chat, but I couldn't open the chat during the presentation. I don't know why my computer is not allowing me to do it. So now I will try to catch up with your conversation in just a second, because I think I can. Oh yes, I can. I can stop. Yes.
Amelia, that was absolutely fascinating. You had the students' rapt attention in the chat, and people were talking about both how brave you are and how consequential this is. I mean, this is a really, really big deal. It reminded me, as you were talking about the scope of the corruption and how highly placed the people involved are. It reminded me of, and apologies, you guys, I'm going to get just a tiny bit political here, but when I was hearing our former president talk about COVID-19, it struck me all of a sudden. I was like, I know who this guy is. This guy is the guy who's in a group project and he didn't do any of the work. And now he's presenting and acting like he's the one who knows what's going on. And I wonder how much that happens, that some of our highest officials are missing a part of their education because they didn't do the work necessary to understand what's going on, you know. And I think before COVID-19 hit, I think people might have thought, well, it doesn't really matter too much, for instance, if our leaders don't know what the scientific method is, how it works. And then around the world, as we watched some of the leaders talk about, you know, what is this? They said one thing at first, and now 2 months later, they said something else. Well, those of us who are familiar with education know that that's exactly how science works. When something new happens, is you do your best guess, you check it with the different assays that you can do, and then you have new knowledge, and then you incorporate that new knowledge and do some more investigation. But if someone hadn't been engaged in, just a few rudimentary science classes, maybe they don't know that that's how science works. I mean, that's why a broad education is so very important. So the fact that you are uncovering instances where our leaders really might not have the knowledge they need to do their jobs, like I can't think of any endeavor that is more important than that. So, and yes, from the chat, someone said, Faiza said that it shows how they govern. It does show how they govern, right? It shows that they don't know science. It shows there's some shocking gaps in history knowledge. There's some shocking gaps in even how the various governmental systems are supposed to work, right? And what the kind of investigative journalism you're doing explains all of that. So I'm going to try not to talk too much anymore, which I want to do, and instead let's focus on some of the questions and comments from the chat. Someone asked if there are examples of corruption being uncovered with respect to people in the healthcare field. And I know that I have certainly made use of some of those examples, but I wonder if either our panelists or anybody else who's in the chat wants to talk about specific instances where this happened with respect to the medical field.
Could I just say that in defense of Romania, Romania is not the only country that is in this situation.
Oh, no.
By
Absolutely not.
a very, very long way. And I've certainly come across many examples from my own research and through just reading the literature and so on, of similar circumstances. As outrageous as that sounds, it's far from the only country that's in this situation. But fortunately, the work of Amelia has thrown light on Romania and allowed us to look at this as a case study, as an example of what can go wrong in a country where corruption begins to pervade everything. And
yeah, I hope nothing I said gave the implication that I thought this was unique to Romania, because it is, as Irene said, it's definitely not.
Yeah, I also know there are a lot of other similarities with many former communist countries, and the very high level of plagiarism in doctoral dissertation is also I understood from other researchers or colleagues I've talked about in other countries, as Slovenia and former Yugoslavian country, and probably in many other countries. But the fact that no one probably tried to analyze the doctoral dissertation of people in very high position, this is the reason that we don't know about this level of academic corruption, because it is a form of corruption in other countries. And sorry,
carry on, Amelia. Thought you finished.
Yeah, I saw that someone was writing, Caroline said that in Romania have very good universities. And yes, this is true. Despite all these branches in some universities, as I present you these military universities, they have a particularity, because politicians were very attracted to obtain a doctoral title in a military university, and I can't understand why they were so attracted to this military university, and probably because they are very hermetic and they didn't not collaborate with civilian professors from other countries, permitted the high level of plagiarism inside of this, and they just stayed behind the walls, and they were never controlled or I don't know, by anyone.
This is one of the reasons that groups and gatherings like this are so very important, because so many of us come to this work and we say, oh my gosh, these things that I have uncovered, they're so unusual and so horrible. But in fact, what you're talking about, it's not unique to Romania. It's not unique to communist countries. It's not unique to any particular place. It exists wherever there are, first of all, power differentials, you know, for talking about people who in high positions, you know, they might not have plagiarized. They might have gotten somebody else to write it for them. Like maybe it's a brand new thing, but they didn't write it. It's so essential that we recognize that this is a problem that really transcends borders. Oscar has very patiently had his hand up. Oscar, if you unmute, you can definitely ask your question.
Thank you, Teddy. Emilia, thank you for this great presentation. In the chat, we are all fascinated by what you have been doing. We are really thrilled with your work. And it's a really brave attempt to uphold academic integrity while listening to you, I felt like Romanian intelligence would break your door and take you during the presentation. This is a really brave attempt. I have very nice takeaways from your presentation. First, the scope of academic integrity. Teddy mentioned this at the beginning of the session, but in your presentation, I can clearly see the scope of academic integrity. We are dealing with student plagiarism, and you are dealing with the plagiarism at the highest level. So the scope of academic integrity is really wide. This is my first takeaway. And then I can clearly see how plagiarism would lead to corruption. So plagiarism becomes misconduct, and misconduct becomes corruption. And this shows me that when we prevent plagiarism or when we deter plagiarism, this means that we can mitigate corruption. And your studies, your efforts clearly shows this, I think. And also, and I can see that it's never too late to react. We cannot say that it's over, they plagiarized, but even if they submit their work and years after, their works can be withdrawn, and it gives me the idea that we should never stop reacting to plagiarism. We should never stop, we should never give away to fight with plagiarism. And also the issue about these misconduct networks. Akbar also wrote this about in the chat. And I never thought about this misconduct networks before. We are all talking about academic integrity networks. And yes, there are misconduct networks too. So this is a network versus network issue. So we should empower our academic integrity networks against these misconduct networks. So all in all, this was really illuminating for me. Thanks again for your valuable research and presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And when I started to write about plagiarism in PhD dissertation of some top officials in the state, some people asked me why you are writing about this kind of people, and my answer was, if I will write about I don't know, let's say an unknown professor or an unknown PhD student, no one will pay attention on academic integrity. And now academic integrity and plagiarism is an issue of a very important issue on our public agenda. So after I start to present some cases, other journalists started also to do it. So they were encouraged to do it. And now, because of so many cases, the system was obliged to react. The system was obliged to take measures and to limit the situation. Well, I wrote about the Police Academy, I think over 30 articles. But in this moment, they are reorganizing the institution, and they abolished that 2 doctoral schools that were functioning, and they were granting doctoral titles in some pretended scientific domains that are unique in the world. No one in the world, you'll never find
That's okay. You're doing all of this hard work in not your first language. It's very hard.
So these 2 domains that are so not related with any scientific domain. So they don't have methods, they don't have corpus, they don't have nothing. So they just recycling other plagiarist books and articles, and they are pretending that they are publishing a new and an original work. So now in this moment, the institution is basically in this reorganizing process, and this is a very important step.
Yep.
That the change can rise.
You asked for an example of medical corruption. I have a really interesting example from Japan. So I thought we'd perhaps focus on a non-communist country.
And I love that because Japan's known for, you know, trying to fight sort of, you know, corruption cases like that. So yes,
Yeah.
please.
And this is a very prestigious university in Japan. I think it is the University of Tokyo. I think it was that, but don't quote me on that, I might be wrong. And what was discovered was that for many, many years, they had been artificially failing female students because they were afraid that there would be too many female doctors who would go off and have children. And it was discovered that you know, they artificially failed a lot of female students that had actually passed, not going to graduate.
Someday we're going to have a panel on academic integrity and the patriarchy, and it's going to be quite the session. I'll share one from Canada because I think it's really, I just can't say enough times that, you know, academic integrity studies in general, we tend to focus on students rather than administrators or researchers or teachers. And we also tend to, even though we try not to, we tend to almost classify some cultures as more corrupt than others. So I'm going to give you an example from Canada, which was with respect to the MCAT, which is the admissions essay or the admissions test to get into medical school. And it's an interesting example on several levels, but one of the most shocking feature is the organization. So there were there was a person who wanted to take the MCAT with assistance, and he enlisted the help of a couple other people who they recruited students to work as what they said were going to be MCAT tutors. So they put out an ad, they said, please, you know, apply for this position. People applied and they had them come in and take a practice MCAT exam. And then the people who were doing the corruption, they looked at who had made the best scores. And then on the day of the MCAT, they said, come back in for your second interview. And they had the people who had done the best on this practice run come back in. Now we have the main subject of the cheating was in taking his exam, and his helper friends got the other two people to sit there and wait until he saw the exam. He took a picture of it with a pinhole camera, either like in a pen or in glasses, or maybe he just had a small one, you know, on his person, and he sent it to his friends. And instead of giving them another practice exam, they gave the people who had come in to apply for the position copies of the test that he was looking at. And then after they filled out the answers, they sent him, the guy who was in taking the test, they sent the answers that the other people who were applying for the position had put on their so-called practice exam. So he was being fed the answers while he was in the test. And the result was, because the only reason that this was discovered is that the people who took the test thought that there was something wrong because they had come in the first time and been given regular practice exams. And then they came in the second time and they had these pictures of somebody's MCAT exams. So they contacted the authorities and they pieced together that that was what had happened. And then they had to invalidate all of those MCATs for that session, because the way the MCAT works is like there were several instances of that test, the very test that they had pictures of, but they didn't know which one, you know, who had actually been involved. So they had to get rid of all of those tests, and that is such a high level of organization. But unless those people had been suspicious, they never would have figured it out. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jamie, for posting that link. That's exactly the case I'm talking about. Yep. So yeah, Canada, Japan, not just former communist countries, not just so-called high corruption countries. This happens anywhere people want an advantage that is unearned. And I also want to bring attention to two more things. First of all, how tightly these two things are intertwined. What Irene started out talking about, how things are, how they are arranged at universities that make this possible. That makes for the ground, like that's the ground, and then the people who want to do these corrupt things, like that's the seed, right? And both of those things are necessary. We have a saying in the United States that says there's no disinfection, or there's no better disinfectant than sunshine. And the idea is that actually doesn't go with my previous metaphor at all, but the idea is that you have to bring things out into the light to see them. And that's why our journalistic allies are so very important, because we can do all this work in academia and it doesn't get the attention that we need. And the way that we get that is when journalists bring attention to it.
Could I ask everyone a question? Are there any issues that concern you that you have faced? Are there anything you want to share with us? And I know it's difficult because it's not anonymous. So is there any kind of, I mean, there are things like the things that affect PhD students particularly. So,
yep, that's one of the questions we started with.
Yeah, such as, you know, if the supervisor insists on being the first author on any papers that you publish, those kind of things, that is a form of corruption if that person didn't actually contribute to that paper. So you might not see that as corruption, but that is a form of corruption if it's an unfair demand of authorship that they didn't contribute to. So there may be things that you don't see as corruption that you think is normal procedure, but actually if there is an element of unfairness in there, then it is a form of misconduct, if not corruption. Is there anything you want to ask about, anything you want to talk about? You know, we've got about a quarter of an hour left, haven't we, of the session? So use this session to just have a discussion about something that interests you, or ask questions of anything that's come up today.
I wish I'd thought to make a Menti slide, because we could have asked that question on Menti and let people be anonymous. Let me see if I can. I think I can do it. Hold on one second.
If there is anything that concerns you, that you know, that's actually rung bells with you today, that you want to talk about privately, any one of us would be happy, I'm sure, to talk to you and advise you. Contact us all privately.
I just want to share something. Hello?
Yes.
Please do
Yeah. After listening to Amelia's presentations, I feel like that there are untouchable areas in which PhD students, for example, can touch and some cannot. There is also some case I can relate cases to my context. Like you know, there was here in my country, for example, the ministry appoints directors, and then the ministry are politicians who have networking with other politicians, which means that to appoint the leaders of the universities, there's something in it. There's one case in one of the university in which a politician wrote a PhD, wrote a dissertation, but and got a degree, but then when it was investigated, the politician was actually in jailed for corruption. So the question, how could the politician write a dissertation in jail? So when that investigated, and then the degree was cancelled, and that kind of things, I think it's not, especially in Southeast Asia, because I position myself in this area. I think this is very, very a big challenge. It's just one case is that the media presentation really spark our how to say our ideas, and also position ourselves in a very, very how to say important role, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you also to the people who wrote in the chat. Yes, thank you so much for your thoughts. And it's important for me to have this kind of feedback, because yes, it was a huge amount of work in all these years. And Faiza asked me if the police targeted me. Yes, they did, but unfortunately, the things, let's say, ended well for me. It was not very simple, but and I also saw earlier. I think it was a question about the academic integrity mandatory courses. Well, yes, they are in national. They are national, so all universities in the country are obliged in this moment to have these courses.
Could I ask you all a question? Have a think about this. What will you take from this afternoon session, and what will you now do differently? Anything? Will it make a difference to the way you view things, or the way you behave, or will it make a difference to how you conduct research, or how you view other people?
Yeah, can I talk about that?
Yes.
Yes, of course. I mean, many of the presentations here in this summer schools, for me, like some new areas, and also especially for Amelia, it's really how to say giving me a different perspective of looking at corruption. In this case, of course, I remember I wrote the titles about academic integrity in international journal, and then I wrote about challenges, but it just touched upon the university. I was not. I think I didn't explore the relationship to the higher levels of outside of the university. I talk about society and etc. But then I can see of that political interest, and also academic interest, and that kind of things interplay, and that really gives me a different view of a broader view of this academic integrity.
That's great to know that your knowledge and your outlook is broadening as a result of this. That's partly what we want to do. And actually, I think the work that Amelia has done has been fantastic in Romania. The fact that she has already made a difference to Romania, And we can probably guess that Romania still has a long way to go, but it's already starting to take steps to embrace integrity, understand what it is, and to accept that changes are needed, and that is the first step for every country, for every institution. I think that's really very, very important.
Yes,
Sorry, I wanted to ask Amelia just a quick question. You said that they're in Romania, they're introducing courses on academic integrity for all the different levels of students, which is fantastic. But are the doctoral supervisors getting training? And if
That's a really good question.
Would they accept the training? Would they do it? Or would they say, no, I already know how to do that?
Well,
sorry to interrupt you, Akbar.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And in 2017, I wrote a guide of academic integrity, of course, for the students. And I remember that some professors in university just called me to ask me how to read a similarity report, or how they must to react in some particular cases. Yes, probably first of all, the professors should follow this kind of classes. And it is another interesting thing that I made a research in, is the one that I presented last week in ENAI's conference. And when I went in the classes to apply the questionnaire, some of professors asked me, probably we should talk more about academic integrity, because we as community, we as professors, we don't know what the term implies, and what the term meaning, the definition, and we don't know how to react in some circumstances. And they and other professors told me that academic integrity is applying just to students, not to themselves, and not to administrative staff. And I was shocked to see reacts like this, to put academic integrity just in relation with students' behavior, and it was, of course, it was very, very surprising for me.
Yeah, and that's a very, very common reaction. Even when those of us who go to visit different institutions, when we go there and we start asking those questions, and sometimes the administrators will say, oh, no, we don't have a problem here. We just want you to work with the students. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that students pay so much more attention to what we do than what we say. You know what I mean? So we might say it's important that you do this, but if we go through our whole presentation, for instance, and we don't have any credit for the authors that we're citing, or we just throw up the images up there and we don't ever say anything about where we got our information, like the students note that more than they note what we're telling them to do. And so they should. You know what I mean? Kudos for them. I apologize about the word limit. This is the very first time I've made a Menti, and I must have messed it up somehow if you couldn't write, because I selected to make it open-ended and I didn't realize there was a word limit, so I apologize for that.
We've got a hand up. Zakir, would you like to open up and talk to us, please?
Hi, just a quick question, actually. Interesting presentations for sure. And Amelia, you mentioned about some of the implementation or some of the education going on in the university level, but is there anything like in the secondary level, for example, to build up the capacity of the students, maybe the teachers as well, didn't happen there? Or is there any plan from the government as of something like that? Thank you.
That's a really, really good question, and I'm sure we all have something to say about that, but I'll just briefly say, far too often in different countries right across the world, when students get to higher education, the lecturers assume that they know everything that they need to know, and that's completely wrong. And we need to, first of all, we need to make sure that when students arrive at university that they have the necessary education, knowledge, and so on, and skills. But also, I completely agree, it's a really important bit of development that we need to do, is to work with students. And in my opinion, it's never too early. So students at any age should gradually be taught about integrity. And it should be in secondary schools, and if not earlier than that.
I will only add to that, that I think anything that we require students to know, we should also give them an opportunity to know. Like if we require it, then there should be a place where it's in the curriculum and it's there for them. There shouldn't be any of this. And this is another thing we hear all the time. There shouldn't be any of this, oh, everyone knows that, or everyone should already know that. The fact is, we know that they don't already know that. So if we require them to know it, there should be an opportunity to know it.
We have in my university, in University of Bucharest, we have a center of research of academic integrity, and in one of our research in one of our public event, we said that we have to go lower in pre-university schools and to raise the awareness about about integrity now we start to have classes, more courses inside inside high schools and inside elementary schools, secondary schools, and we try to go there because it's very important to build up knowledge in lower education phase.
Y'all, we are just about out of time, and I so hate it because this discussion was so very fruitful. When I saw what Irene and Amelia were going to present, I volunteered to just do the introduction and the kind of conducting of this session, because what they had to say was so fascinating and so related. And I'm so glad that all of you engaged with it, because really these things are at the heart of the work that we're doing. This is where the rubber meets the road. And this is also a encapsulated lesson of why it is so very important. So thank you very much for being with us. And thank you so much for your engagement. And I hope you continue through the rest of the week to be this engaged. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great to meet you all. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon.
See you all.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.